Maigad Gina, agus Harvas Esta Virastig, Skal Sauri, Poedig Vigil, agus Ska Sharting Alanya, Poedig Vigil, agus Boilem, we has sort of nul don, Kosh Adviart, agus Joe Arish, Ahagans, and Group of Shalikilla, Gafian, La Killiru or Seal, Poedig Miguel, a faster just Sprakte of Eogin, Tauhi in the Chira Shaw, agus Keshna Wore at our own. Delighted to be back again at the McGill Summer School as a local TD. I'm delighted to invite all our visitors to this part of Donegal, and we try and keep it a secret that the weather's like this all year round, so we'd appreciate if you keep it quiet. We like the unspoilt nature of Donegal. The topic that we've been asked to address is about institutional failings are rooted in our political culture. And I think it's important to look back at the history of this state and the partition of Ireland, which was accompanied by a counter-revolution which created two very conservative states on the island of Ireland. Both states were shaped to serve the interests of specific political and economic elites. An orange one-party state in the north sustained itself through institutionalised discrimination, sectarianism and segregation. In the south here, the idealism and the vision of the Republican revolutionaries of 1916 was replaced by the narrow interests of a conservative elite in business and in politics. And these forces took their lead in social matters from an extremely conservative Catholic Church hierarchy. The control of health and education was franchised out to church, and we're still dealing with the dreadful consequences of that today. The institutional failings of this state are direct consequences of all of these events. However, they are also due to the repeated failings of conservative, successive generations of politicians. Those politicians who were in government and whose failures are unquestionably linked to the institutional failings cannot be left off the hook on the basis that they were acting within the political culture at the time. And this includes those who were in government and leading the opposition during the later years of the Celtic Tiger period. Like the insulting suggestion that we all partied during the boom, there has also been a trend to suggest that we were all complicit in the political culture of the state since its foundation. But through those years, there were people who spoke out and who fought back, progressive voices suppressed by the combined strength of a conservative establishment. There were ordinary people, like those families who fought against the pressures to put their daughters into Magdalen laundries or mother and baby homes, who took a stand against the accepted norms of the time. And many of the institutional failings of the state have only been exposed when courageous individuals have spoken out and challenged the status quo. And I'm thinking when I say that of people like Tom Gilmartin, of Christine Buckley, of Andrew Madden, of Louise O'Keeffe, of the still anonymous midwife who blew the whistle on Dr. Neary in the Lady of Lourdes Hospital in Drogheda, of Tom Clonan, and most recently Maurice McCabe and John Wilson, who are still going through serious personal price for what they've done in terms of blowing the whistle on the penalty points fiasco. And all we have to do is look at how disgracefully the state treated Louise O'Keeffe, and look at how it treated the victims of symphysiotomy and abuses that had its roots in the unhealthy relationship between church and state. We've also had the Morris Tribunal, which exposed corruption in the Gardaí, the Mahon Tribunal, the Moriarty Tribunal, which exposed the actions of planners and Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael politicians, while the report into the Commission of Inquiry Institutional Child Abuse, the Murphy Report and the Ferns Report, exposed criminality at the heart of the Irish Catholic Church. It was the actions of individuals that exposed the corruption, abuse and malpractice that has occurred in this state since its foundations. And it takes individuals to blow the whistle, but it takes the combined strength of the ordinary people to make the to change both politics and political culture. The political culture of the state has its roots in the formation of the state itself. It is in its reactionary nature and its repression of all those who confronted and challenged the status quo. A state which so easily turned its back on its citizens in the north, on its emigrants, and on its citizens who most needed its support. Similar to many colonial struggles, the national revolution gave way to the counter-revolution. Many post-colonial governments mimic the imperial empire. In Ireland, we inherited a system of government reflecting Westminster. Our economy was attached to London, and we had no ideological difference between the main parties in the state. What developed here was a political culture of impunity, a state with no real opposition to hold governments to account, and no media willing to hold politicians to account. The politics of the establishment consensus that did not have the interest of the majority of the Irish people at its core. Self-preservation by a small but powerful elite has been the underlying feature of this political culture. It is a culture of entitlement, best seen in the opposition to wage cuts at the top of public sector and by the recent scandals that engulfed certain state-funded bodies and charities. When we look at political culture and institutional failings, we cannot ignore the role that the media has played. Almost uniquely in Western Europe, this state has no left-wing media, and there is a growing problem, a major problem, with the development of a monopoly in media ownership. The Irish media not only failed to challenge the economic policies of the Celtic Tiger period, but in the main it actively and progressively and aggressively promoted them. Instead of asking the questions about the implications of a property bubble and the dependence on exchequer on taxes related to construction and consumption, or querying what was going on in the banks in terms of financial regulation, the mainstream ignored, rubbished or silenced critical voices asking these key questions. Light touch regulation was part of the dominant political philosophy in the state. It was pursued with vigour by the Progressive Democrats in Fianna Fáil and largely unchallenged with what were the major opposition parties at the time, and again, crucially unchallenged by the media. Political culture will only change when politics changes, when we break the stranglehold of the establishment parties on the governance of the state. For far too long, this state has been governed in the interest of the few. The disadvantaged and the vulnerable have at best seen a blind eye turned towards their need. And ordinary citizens have been forced to pay a very heavy burden to the price that successive governments have been in hock to the elite of private interests, including lobbyists, developers and bankers. And the establishment has had its way for far too long. We have seen the rot that was allowed to develop within the Gardaí, within politics, within banking, within the entanglement between church and state, and within the state itself, as two Conservative parties retained their stranglehold on government. Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil politicians have been more than happy to have immigration act as a safety valve against the pressure for political and social change. In his contribution to the report of the Commission of Immigration produced in the early 1950s, Alexis Fitzgerald, who went on to be a Fine Gael senator and advisor to Fine Gael Taoiseach Gareth Fitzgerald, summed up this attitude when he stated, "I believe that there should be a more realistic appreciation of the advantages of immigration. High immigration, granted a population excess, releases social tensions, which could otherwise explode and make possible a stability of manners and customs, which would otherwise be the subject of radical change." So the immigration valve was turned on to ensure radical change was suppressed. And the Irish diaspora then as now were denied their say on the future of their country. Corruption in Irish political life has been endemic and systemic under the governments involving Fine Gael, Labour and Fianna Fáil. A culture of political cronyism and favouritism has prevailed for decades, allowing golden circles of powerful individuals to consider themselves above the rule of law and that apply to ordinary citizens. The crony culture has been widely evidenced over the years in terms of the appointment to state boards. And I ask you, what message do we send out when we propose to send to Europe as our Commissioner a person who embodies what is wrong with our political culture? What message do we send by promoting someone for party loyalty with no regard to their actions in promoting political cronies and boasting about denying traveller families the right to housing? A cultural shift is urgently required in order to restore public confidence and trust. And Sinn Féin is committed to that, committed to modernising public sector governance in the wider context of political reform. And this includes corporate governance of all state bodies which are publicly funded. We must ensure that all publicly funded appointments are made on the basis of merit, reflect the makeup of our diverse society, and that equality is at the core of public appointments process, with opportunities to serve on public bodies promoted to the widest possible field of potential candidates in a public manner. Trust and confidence in the political system has been shattered as the consequence of a disastrous management of our economy, of our public services and state finances. And it is also shattered as a result of the inaction of the current government in delivering of their promise to introduce political reform. This coalition's approach to political reform has been piecemeal and minimalist. It has done nothing to rebalance power between central and local government or between the oireachtas, between the executive and the legislator. Meaningful political reform proposals must be based on the principles of sovereignty, democracy, accountability, transparency, national unity, equality, empowerment of local community, and the creation of a political system where citizens come first. Many of the issues which I have touched on today are the legacy of bad politics and the legacy of politicians who failed to stand up for the best interests of the citizens of Ireland. But politics in Ireland is already changing. The old dominance of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael is going, and with that comes the hope that real change can be achieved. Progressive voices have never been louder, and the challenge for us is to build on this. We are, I believe, on the cusp of something that has never been achieved before, a government without Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. And that is when political culture in the state will really change. Because there can be no elite in a new Ireland. No group can be immune from the laws that the rest of us must obey. Nor there can be any group that is denied equality or justice. And more people are coming to believe that there is a better way. In business, there is a saying that form should follow function, that structures should be built for a purpose, that we need to recognise that there is a need for fundamental change, and this should be reflected in our institutions. And this isn't without precedence. Arising out of the conflict, the Good Friday Agreement recognised the fundamental rights that all people should be treated with equality and respect. And this became the starting point for the design of institutions which were based on power sharing and interlinked, reflecting the relationships within the North, between the North and the South, and between Ireland and Britain. It also put in place robust legislation on equality and commissions to safeguard human rights. And I am suggesting that these institutions should be brought wholesale into the state, nor am I suggesting that the potential for the Good Friday Agreement has been fully realised. But I do believe that now is the time for a discussion on the future of our people and our nation and on the institutions that serve them. The Good Friday Agreement does demonstrate that fundamental change is possible where there is political will. The agreement also provides for a peaceful and democratic way to a new Ireland, a united Ireland. And it provides this generation with an opportunity to reimagine Ireland and its people. At the recent elections, we stood in a platform of speaking out and standing up for the needs of ordinary people, particularly those struggling under the burden of austerity. And Sinn Féin makes no apologies for it. We are here to challenge the establishment, to challenge the status quo, to challenge the political culture, to fight for a state and a country that acts in the interests of its citizens, not in the interests of a small or privileged group at the top echelons of society. Sinn Féin is not and never will be afraid to make a stand on issues, even when it isn't popular to do so. And political culture doesn't emerge from nowhere. The political culture we have inherited reflected the lack of vision and ideology and a failure to heal the wounds of the Civil War and the promotion of privilege and position over the needs of people. But culture evolves and can be challenged and can be changed. Gormaigh.